Remember all the hypes about Xiaohongshu, aka Rednote, back in 2024? So a lot of Americans went there as a protest against the potential ban of TikTok. That app felt like a refreshing breeze for American users because everything looked so positive. It was probably the first time a website had so many Chinese and American users at the same time, and they both seemed to have a shared admiration of China and a shared contempt of the United States. It was like a magical friendship garden with nothing but flowers and sunshine. But that may change pretty soon, as Xiaohongshu has started the process of segregating Chinese and overseas users. In 2024, the dominant idea among American netizens was like, finally, Xiaohongshu is destroying the US propaganda and helping us see the real China. Honestly, I was really perplexed by that sentiment because, think about it, the internet traffic restrictions on both directions were imposed by China, not by the US. The restrictions of Chinese users on American websites and the restrictions of American users on Chinese websites are both set up by China. Even if the US government wanted to segregate the internet like that, they wouldn't be able to. Just imagine if Chinese social media starts to welcome international users. Who can stop you from going? No one. The US government doesn't have either the legal or the technical tools to keep you from those popular places, like Weibo or Douyin or Bilibili. And by the same token, if China disables the internet firewall, who can possibly prevent Chinese users from swarming the American websites? No one. Maybe Elon Musk or Larry Ellison can try to mess up the algorithm, but only to a certain extent. They wouldn't want to stop 500 million potential Chinese visitors, nor would they be able to. So the only reason it's hard for you to find information about China is, well, China. On one hand, China treats foreign social media like some plague and keep Chinese users from going. On the other hand, China makes all the domestic platforms highly unfriendly to overseas users. On Weibo, for example, you can't register a new account using non-Chinese phone numbers. On Bilibili, you can watch videos, but you have to verify your identity before you can post videos. And Douyin, of course, simply doesn't allow foreign users. WeChat is usable worldwide, but it's mostly a messaging app. The messages are private. If you want to have a public account or 公共号 on WeChat, you need to be physically in China. And now the same thing is finally happening to Xiaohongshu. Now if you enter xiaohongshu.com, you get a Chinese website whose data are hosted in China. And if you try to log in, the area code of your phone number is restricted to 86, which is China's code. See, if I click it, nothing happens. You can't change that 86, which means you can't sign in with a non-Chinese phone number. But if you enter rednote.com instead of xiaohongshu.com, you get a partly English website whose data are hosted in Singapore. And here you can choose any area code. Currently, the two versions aren't exactly segregated like Douyin and TikTok. You can still visit both versions no matter where you are, and you can still find Chinese users' posts on the international version and vice versa. But they did start to separate the storage and redirect some of the users based on their locations. So it's almost guaranteed that after some trial periods, the two versions will be completely segregated, following the TikTok model. So the interesting question is why? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. If China disables the firewall, will something big happen right away? I doubt it. But I can tell the amount of resources the CCP spends on this can't be accidental. They're not just playing. There must be some information they consider so dangerous that it outweighs the propaganda value of letting Chinese and foreign netizens flirt and socialize. First, there's a reputational risk if some disgruntled Chinese citizens start to complain directly to foreigners. You know, the national image and stuff. But that's not the worst part. Americans learning about the problems in China won't have any direct political consequence. A more alarming scenario for China is when information travels out to the open ground that's not censored by China and then becomes trend and travels back to China. That will have real political consequence. Imagine if you're an individual suffering some kind of injustice, whether it's police brutality, or poverty, or land expropriation, a labor dispute, sexual harassment, etc. You may not be able to fight much because you're alone. You're just an individual. But if you find out there are millions of people suffering the same thing as you do, you get emboldened and you start becoming politically engaged. And then you start reading and sending messages that can grow into a mass movement. A government doesn't always fear grievance per se, but it definitely fears the coordination of people with the same grievance. That's what the internet firewall is about, to prevent coordination. Let me digress a little bit and give you some examples of the coordination problem in protests. One example is inflation. Even a highly oppressive government will try very hard to control inflation. Why? Because when you suffer inflation, you know exactly how much everyone else is also suffering. That information is hard to hide because everyone sees the same price tags. You don't need the internet to know that you're not alone. So when inflation is high, even if the economy is growing, the governing party will still suffer politically. So that's something every government cares about. And now, an opposite example is sexual assault. The unique thing about sex crimes is that the victims don't like to talk about them. Only a small percentage of the victims go to the police, let alone broadcasted on the internet. That means even though the victims know their own stories, they may not know how common the same stories happen to other people. Sometimes they may even think it's their own fault. So that's why a lot of governments pay very little attention to sex crimes, if not commit them directly. So those are two extreme examples. Most social issues fall in between. They're not as obvious as inflation, but not as hidden as sex crimes. So whether those issues can inspire a movement depends on people's ability to communicate their grievance. That, I think, is the top reason China spends billions of dollars a year to maintain a giant firewall. So the moment Rednote started to become popular, I knew something like this would happen. I remember seeing some Chinese posters be like, "Do these Americans really think they can stay? So cute." The information segregation was doomed to happen because the Chinese population has so many hidden complaints that they're not allowed to broadcast. There are topics that even I'm afraid of talking about. I really shouldn't, but I'll give you a quick example. Do you know how fast you can get an organ transplant in China? If you can afford it, of course. Do your own research, don't rely on me. This is the kind of thing you should ask AI instead of real people because, AI won't be killed by car accidents. Let me repeat the same advice again. No matter what problems you have in your life, a Chinese-styled dictatorship won't help you solve them. You need to find better solutions.